Remembering Justice Antonin Scalia. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. It was just about 7 years ago. The Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, Antonin Scalia, died at the age of 79, and he left a long legacy of historic importance at the nation's highest court. Many of us in the conservative world miss him to this day. And before I get into all of that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for your faith-based podcast, at washingtontimes.com, where you may also sign up for my 3 times a week newsletter. Just click on my name on the website, scroll to the bottom of my commentary there, and you will find an easy peasy link to click on to sign up for my 3 times a week newsletter. It comes out Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, delivered right to your email box, contains my commentaries as well as my twice weekly Bold and Blunt podcasts, which you may also get simply by going to wherever fine podcasts are offered. Let's go back in time briefly to September 26th, 1986, the swearing-in ceremony of Chief Justice William Rehnquist and
Antonin Scalia. Justice Rehnquist and Mrs. Rehnquist, and the Chief Justice and Mrs. Berger.
By no less than then President Ronald Reagan. Such a somber ceremony, dignified.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and Mrs. Reagan.
And here comes Ronald Reagan. Just a few short years ago, and seems so very different in atmosphere than today's political world. Even Democrats were clapping then. No white suits in sight. No protests.
Thank you.
Here's Reagan.
Members of the court and ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the White House, and thank you for coming to witness this historic occasion. This ceremony is the culmination of our constitutional process, which involves each of the 3 branches of government. I've had the honor of nominating Justice Rehnquist to be the next Chief Justice of the United States and Judge Scalia to be the Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. The Senate has confirmed my nominations, and I now ask that Chief Justice Warren Berger administer the constitutional oath of office to Justice Rehnquist and Judge Scalia.
Wow, such a somber, dignified ceremony, like I said a minute ago. So very different from the tone and atmosphere of today, where in the background you would hear Black Lives Matter protesters and Antifa-type thuggery in the streets. And meanwhile, the mainstream media, if they covered this event at all, would be criticizing and weighing in with all sorts of allegations and accusations and expressions of scorn and derision against these 2 conservative justices, these 2 actually constitutionally based justices. They both, in their interpretations of their job duties, found more often than not cause to place limits on government rather than grow government, rather than use their judicial seats as activists to bring forth the progressive agenda, like many leftist appointed judges do nowadays. Less activism, more constitutional originalism, and definitely less leftist activism outside the residences of Supreme Court justices. A different day, different time. Okay, let's just listen in again to the swearing in of Judge Scalia.
Judge Scalia, are you prepared to take the oath of office?
I am, Chief Justice.
Would you approach, and if Mrs. Scalia will hold the Bible, place your left hand on the Bible.
The Bible.
Raising your right hand and repeat after me. I, Antonin Scalia, do solemnly swear
I, Antonin Scalia, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
against all enemies,
foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the
that
same,
I take this obligation freely,
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge
and that I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties of the office
on
which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God. My congratulations.
Well, that's enough of the trip down memory lane, because I have with me a guest who has looked at the years before that historic occasion in Justice Antonin's life, the 50 years before he rose to such great Supreme Court of the United States heights, and talked about in his new book the events and experiences that brought him to the office in the first place. The book is called Scalia, Rise to Greatness, 1936 to 1986. It's penned by James Rosen, the chief White House news correspondent for Newsmax, and he's here today to discuss some of his findings in his excellent book. James, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Carol. It's great to be with you.
Your new book, Scalia, Rise to Greatness, 1936 to 1986. I cannot wait to read this. And one of the things that sparked my immediate intrigue was that you mentioned you interviewed Scalia's former poker buddies. And I'm just curious, what did they say?
Yes, this book, Scalia, Rise to Greatness, covers the first 50 years of Antonin Scalia's life. It ends with him taking his seat on the Supreme Court. And so hopefully just 2 years from now, there'll be a second and final volume called Scalia's Supreme Court Years. And yes, for this book that documents the early life, the Catholic upbringing, the education, and the early and very important jobs that Scalia held both in academia and in the federal government, I interviewed a vast array of people who knew the man, from 4 of his 9 children to fellow Supreme Court justices and judges, hunting companions, students of his, classmates of his, and yes, priests and poker buddies. The poker buddies, this was something that Scalia started doing when he was practicing law in Cleveland in the early 60s. He carried it with him wherever he went, wherever he was a professor at UVA or the University of Chicago Law School. He had a kind of a weekly poker game. And when he eventually became a judge and a justice in Washington, this was a group that included the Chief Justice of the United States, William Rehnquist. One of the poker players was Bill Bennett, the former Secretary of Education, when I asked him what kind of poker player was Scalia, and he said not a terribly good one. He told me that Scalia was given to inordinate risk-taking as a poker player. Jeffrey Stone, who was a colleague of Scalia's at the University of Chicago Law School in the late 70s and early 80s, and who later became dean of that law school, recalled that Scalia was fond of unusual kinds of poker games with a twist to them, such as one wherein one player would attach a card to his forehead that only the other players could see, but the player himself wearing the card could not see. And this was sort of Scalia's way of enlivening the game. Stone also recalled that Scalia would always show up, invariably, wearing the same old fishing hat, a symbol of sorts that Stone took to interpret as Scalia reveling in the fact that this was his night out with the boys.
That is awesome. I'm a little bit jealous. You must have so enjoyed doing the research and interviews for this book.
I did, and if there's anything about me for which to be jealous, it's that I actually knew Justice Scalia a little bit. When I first came to Washington as a reporter in 1999, one of the first things I did, Cheryl, was write to Justice Scalia and ask for an interview. And this commenced a 2-year correspondence between us that is really hilarious at times, and which will be covered in Volume 2. And we also had a pair of one-on-one lunches at his beloved AV Ristorante Italiano, now long gone, but it used to be on a sketchy part of New York Avenue at the time. And, we had wine. The justice made me eat off of his plate. I said, Mr. Justice, I couldn't. Come on. So there I was, shoveling vegetables off of Justice Scalia's plate. He drove me back to my office in his car. and I subsequently confirmed with a number of clerks and others who were passengers in his car that it was scary for them as well. I'm just very grateful to him for the extraordinary generosity that he showed to a young reporter a quarter century ago. And it was as a result of those interactions with him that I resolved that one day I would write about it.
Wow. Well, you're a good storyteller just listening to you these last couple minutes. And of course, you have the expertise with your media background, and I'm sure that it shows well in this book. How did you decide first to write about his rise to greatness instead of jumping right into his appointment on the court? Because it seems to me that most people would just look at his work on the Supreme Court and want to dig into that.
Well, this project began as a concise biography of Antonin Scalia, if you can believe that. And me being me, I don't do anything short. But I just discovered that two things. Number one is that the two existing biographies of Justice Scalia, one of which he cooperated with extensively, the other not at all, both of which were published in his lifetime, both of them came out pretty openly hostile to Scalia's jurisprudence, his philosophy, his conduct. And the other thing that I discovered was that there was so much new material that hadn't been covered in the first two biographies. Some of the important phases of his whole life, such as his Catholicism, his 4 years that he spent as a law professor at the University of Virginia Law School in the late 1960s, these were treated so breezily and summarily in the previous biographies, and yet they were fascinating periods for him, and they shaped how he later conducted himself as a jurist. I interviewed a number of his students from the University of Virginia, one of whom recalled for me what then Professor Scalia told the class when they had to take an exam the morning after Robert F. Kennedy's assassination. There were accounts of Scalia's interactions with students during some of the protests that got out of hand on this campus in Charlottesville at that time. Charlottesville was not immune to the sweeping anti-war protest and radicalism that was present on college campuses in that era. That's just one example. Scalia's first two government jobs were in 1970, when he was about 35. He was appointed as general counsel to a new agency created by the Nixon administration. It was called the White House Office of Telecommunications Policy. And next to none of his writings from that period have been published until now. And examining his correspondence, his memos, his drafts, his handwritten notes from that 2-year period he spent, it's extraordinary because Scalia actually predicted the Internet. He predicted the privacy concerns that would attend the growth of the Internet. We're talking about when he was writing in 1971. And then his second job in government was, well, his second job as an executive branch official was he was Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel at the Department of Justice. It's such an unwieldy title, but it really means he was the President's lawyer's lawyer. The Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel dispenses written legal opinions that are binding for all of the actors and the officials and the branch and the agencies that are part of the executive branch, pronouncing it lawful or unlawful for a White House or a department or a cabinet agency to take this or that action. William Rehnquist had held that job when he was nominated to the Supreme Court. And again, Scalia's previous biographers have tended to interpret every phase and episode of his career in the most tendentious light. But in fact, my review of the record, and I turned up thousands of pages of previously unpublished documents from Scalia's career at the time, showed that he was actually one of the good guys, a profile in courage during the post-Watergate era, when there were determined efforts on the part of Democrats in Congress and in the news media to curtail the powers of the presidency. Scalia and other conscientious conservatives, lawyers of that time, recognized that after Watergate and its subsidiary scandals would fade, the country would still need a strong executive. And Scalia was instrumental in preserving the powers of the presidency from this onslaught. He also worked on a lot of classified matters, and there got to the point where, in the post-Watergate era, just about all covert actions were being run past Antonin Scalia for his approval at the Justice Department. And one of the most interesting ones, and this is not published elsewhere previously, is that on the afternoon of April 30, 1975, he got a call from the White House saying, "We need your legal opinion on this within just a few hours, whether it's lawful under the War Powers Act for us to evacuate our personnel from the roof of the Saigon embassy as Saigon was falling." And of course, Scalia gave his approval for the operation, but he later said, what is the world coming to, he said. Again, I chose to eventually split this into two books, Cheryl, because I found so much rich material that had either been overlooked or never found by previous biographers.
Did Scalia have a genuine love for America, or was his love more for law?
Well, America is a nation of laws. So to love one intrinsically is to love the other. And Scalia is really the embodiment of the American dream. And this book is the one that Scalia fans have been waiting for. And it's the book that people who believe in the American dream will really appreciate. His father was an Italian immigrant who came to this country in 1920, speaking no English, and who wound up becoming a professor, a renowned professor of Romance languages. His mother was herself the child of Italian immigrants, born in the United States, and who became an elementary school teacher. They were devout Catholics. And this book is really the first to treat Scalia's Catholicism in the depth that it deserves. And from his immersion in the Catholic liturgy, and from the influences of his parents, who were teachers, and his father in particular, the expert on languages, he emerged from all of this with a profound reverence for text. That the text of something such as Shakespeare or the Constitution or a law is not to be monkeyed with or ignored. And this influenced the way he served as a judge and a justice on the Supreme Court.
What was he like just to cut up with? What was he like to hang out with and have a glass of wine with? And how much of that anecdotal discussions that you had with Scalia makes it into your new book, Scalia Rise to Greatness?
Actual conversations that we had over lunch were off the record and will remain that way. I will, in the second volume, feature some of the contents of my amusing correspondence back and forth with him. There were others, obviously, who knew him much better than I did. But just in the lunches that we had, he was so down to earth and amusing and unpretentious that you could sort of be forgiven for forgetting from time to time that you're in the presence of one of the greatest minds of our generation. He was just sort of like an avuncular Italian uncle, like Paul Sorvino, I imagine, would have been. Like he was having me eat vegetables off of his plate. One amusing aspect to lunch was I got there first. And when he arrived, he was silhouetted by the sun shining through the front door of the restaurant. And this silhouette, this sort of portly figure, starts jauntily walking towards me. And he sits down and pleasantries were effectuated. This was 1999. I was 30. And he takes a look at the menu and he says to the waiter, who spoke only broken English, who was a true Italian, he said, "What is pulpy?" And the waiter said, "Octopus." And he said, "Octopus, I'll have the pulpy." And he hands the menu back. Now, I have a rule, Cheryl, when I'm dining with someone who I want to impress, I eat nothing with my hands, nothing that's going to splatter like spaghetti, just things that are easily manipulable with a knife and fork. And I come from Staten Island, which is a heavily Italian population, so I just ordered veal parmesan. I thought that would be perfect for the occasion. The guy is writing it down, and Scalia interrupts, and he says, No. You know what? Give him the rabbit. And the waiter and I look at Scalia in unison, and we both say, "Rabbit." And he says, "Yeah, you're going to like the rabbit. Give him the rabbit." And the waiter stalked off and brought me later rabbit. And Cheryl, I had never had rabbit in my life. I haven't had it since. I had no interest in eating rabbit. And here was the country's foremost opponent of judicial activism overruling my lunch order, which hasn't happened to me since.
You're right. I am jealous.
One of his longtime friends, Brian Lamb, who served at him at that White House Office of Telecommunications Policy in the early 70s and later went on to great fame of his own as an executive and host at C-SPAN. Brian Lamb told me that Scalia was a happening, and that to be around him, you kind of had to accept him on his own terms, but that it was a lot of fun when you did.
He had a famous friendship with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about that. But also, I'm curious, do you have any idea how he would view the court today, the makeup and quality of the justices at the Supreme Court today?
Well, I'll dispense with the second question first. One of the things that Scalia championed, the heart of his legacy, was originalism. This is the idea that when what do judges do for a living? They have two parties before them that are arguing over the law and what it means. It's the judge's job, or the Supreme Court justice's job, to interpret the law and tell us what it really means. And until Scalia came along, there was a liberal notion that prevailed in legal circles, the idea of the living Constitution, the idea that the framers of the Constitution could not have foreseen some modern phenomena like nuclear weapons or the internet, and therefore judges, in interpreting the Constitution, need to allow it to expand and breathe to account for modern phenomena, and that in doing that, we could just as well look not at the text of the law, but at the legislative history behind the law. What was said during the House floor debates or the Senate floor debates? What was printed in those committee reports that were generated along as a bill snaked its way through the process? Scalia stood athwart all of that. Scalia championed the philosophy of originalism, that a judge's job in interpreting the meaning of the Constitution or a given statute is to adhere to the original meaning it had at the time that it was enacted and signed into law. And that is the meaning it was widely understood to have at the time. The people's representatives voted on the text of a law, and that's what a president signed into law. And how should we divine the original meaning of a constitutional provision or a statute? And for this, Scalia turned to something he called textualism. That is to say, instead of looking at the legislative intent, what they intended is the text. That's what they voted on. And so to read text is to give us the best idea of the meaning of a law. This was considered revolutionary stuff when he came along. By the time he died, no less a figure than the liberal Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan, with whom he also had a great relationship, had pronounced that we are all originalists now. The importance of this is that now judges, or let's say lawyers arguing in front of judges and justices, they go first to the text of the law. They don't bother with legislative history anymore and other extraneous matters. And they're looking for the original meaning as contained in the text. And when judges and justices rule on this basis, they affect every corner of American life, as we all know. Right. That's why Scalia is one of the most important figures of the last 100 years, beyond the law. Now, having explained all that, you'll understand, Cheryl, if I am leery of attributing to Antonin Scalia, who passed from the scene 7 years ago, particular views about particular modern judges or phenomena that he didn't live to see.
Right.
As for the relationship with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I'm glad you asked, because this book, Scalia, Rise to Greatness, which just came out this week, contains for the first time the private letters, memos, drafts, opinions that flew back and forth between Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Antonin Scalia when they first got to know each other, when they were both judges on the D.C. Circuit, which is the Court of Appeals that's one rung below the Supreme Court and often referred to as the second most powerful court in America. They served together on that court for 4 years, and that's really where their famous celebrated friendship germinated and blossomed. And in Scalia Rise to Greatness, you'll see in this paper that's flying back and forth between their chambers, never read until now, where Ruth Bader Ginsburg is quelling over Antonin Scalia, needling him, challenging him, provoking him on various aspects of the law in which they disagreed. And for his part, Scalia is praising her to the sky, saying he couldn't have done a better job on this or that opinion, willing at certain points to acknowledge error to her, apologizing at one point for a late draft that he owed by saying, "Sloth that I am." And so their correspondence at that time was really unlike any other judges on that court at that time, having read all these papers, and perhaps unlike any the correspondence between any two judges on any court at any time. So if you pick up the book, Scalia Rise to Greatness, you'll be able to really witness blossoming of this celebrated famous friendship between Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Antonin Scalia.
Oh, this is going to be an awesome book to read, really, and it's definitely going to be a blockbuster. And if you don't mind, I have one other question. Do you have time for a minute? I can't let you go without bringing up Scalia's untimely death, and it sparked among conservatives in America, many of them, because if you recall, Obamacare was a big issue at the time. It sparked a lot of conspiracy talk. I'm just wondering if you had any reflections on that, and particularly how his family handled that.
I expect to cover, of course I will be covering the death of Justice Scalia in the second volume, near the end of the story. I think that all of that conspiracy theorizing that surrounded his death compounded the pain that the family felt. No one's told me that, but that's my supposition. And yet, having interviewed some of his clerks literally the day or 2 days before he died, no one saw anything amiss with his health. What was extraordinary in retrospect to these people is how ordinary he seemed at the time. But I expect that in the second volume of this biography, I will have an opportunity to put to rest any lingering theories that persist about the nature of his death. He was taken from us a little too soon, just shy of his 80th birthday, but there was nothing untoward about it.
Yeah, that is a question for your second book, and I knew that. I just wanted to throw it in there anyhow because I know listeners would be wondering what you thought about it. Regardless, your first book, it's out now, Scalia, Rise to Greatness, 1936 to 1986. It's a tremendous read. I just know it. I will be picking up my own copy. And in the meanwhile, thank you, James. Thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt and discussing this.
Thank you, and just a reminder, you can watch me on Newsmax, where I'm the chief White House correspondent, and you can follow me on Twitter at James Rosen TV.
Good points. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Cheryl.
Scalia is certainly a voice that is missed on the Supreme Court, though due to Donald Trump's appointments and his ability to confirm certain justices on the courts, the U.S. Supreme Court does have a decided conservative slant today, and that is good for the fate of American liberties. If you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at washingtontimes.com, and, of course, wherever fine podcasts are offered. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.